Hello, my name is Mark Ruljancich. I'm chairman of the Immigrant Experience Project of CroatiaFest. Tonight I'll be interviewing Lee Ruljancich. Since we both have a last name, we are not husband and wife. We were for many, many years. We have 3 children and 3 grandchildren now, and both of our families were immigrants from Croatia. So let's start our interview. Give us the history of your parents, where they came from, what part of Croatia.
All right. Well, my parents are both Croatian. However, my father was born in Tacoma. My mother was born in a little town called Podgora. Her father was killed in the First World War. So she and my grandmother went to live with his family along with his brothers and their wives.
And that was in Podgora?
That was in Podgora. It did not turn out to be a happy situation for my mother and my grandmother. When my mother was 13, they were able to migrate to Vancouver, BC. My grandmother had an older sister who had married and settled there, and they had a couple of children, and so they helped my mother and grandmother to get there. They took a train from Podgora to London, a ship to Quebec, and then a train to Vancouver. My mother's strongest memory of that ship was her first encounter with a banana. She'd never seen a banana before in her life.
They don't have that over there?
No, she didn't know what to do with it. So a kind passenger told her how to peel it, and to her dying day, she always loved bananas. I don't know if that was the reason.
And she was 13 years old?
She was 13 then, and they came, my grandmother's sister and her family ran a boarding house in Vancouver for Croatian fishermen. My mother's experience with that was that she was always hungry because the fishermen had such good appetites and they served themselves first. After
just excuse me, tell me a little more about your father. Where did his father come from? He was Croatian also?
Yes, he was. Okay, his father came from
Croatia.
Yeah, the island of Vis, Komiža. And my father was born in Tacoma as well. His brother was also born there, and then they moved to Riverside, and 2 more siblings, 2 sisters, were born there.
Okay, how did your father and your mother get together when she was in Vancouver and he was down in this area?
When she was 15, they all moved to Seattle, and I'm still not quite sure how that all happened and how they got visas or citizenship or what, but they ended up in Seattle. And they all lived together. My grandmother went to work cleaning office buildings and banks. She worked hard. My mother was enrolled in school. However, she couldn't speak English very well, so they put her in the 5th grade, and she was 15. And this did not sit well. I don't know how long she lasted in school, but she eventually went to work. She worked in a factory where they made hats. And she and my
Had she met your father yet?
No, they met at a church dance, St. Margaret's Church in Interbay. Yeah. And they, my father was a fisherman. Although he was educated too, he went to business school, and so he worked in that capacity for a while when, the off season from fishing. But I remember growing up in West Seattle, and we were, we spoke Croatian in our home. My grandmother lived with us. That was mostly why.
What year did they get married?
They got married in 1936. And we had a house in West Seattle. We didn't live in Riverside, but we were still very much a part of the Croatian community. Our friends, the people that my parents entertained, were all Croatian people.
And were most of them still living in Riverside?
No, not necessarily, but there was that community, and we all socialized. Some of it wasn't much fun for my brother and I. We were kids, and we were dragged along to visit these old people where my parents and the other people would sit around a table playing cards and drinking wine. And I remember there was always this big bowl of nuts and a nutcracker in the middle of the table. Well, my brother and I, we had to sit on the sofa and try to entertain ourselves. There was no TV, of course. If we were lucky, we could find a few old magazines, and they never changed, from visit to visit, the same magazine, Saturday Evening Post. And we dare not complain, that's just what you did. So there was a lot of that visiting back and forth.
Talking about that, I have an interesting story. I don't know if you remember it. One of the old folks that you visited with your folks was the Mladneo family in Tacoma. And when you and I were 1 year old, apparently we were on the Mladneo's floor playing around with each other.
Who knew?
We didn't meet after that again until college.
Until college, yeah. Yeah, well, I still remember that house where my father lived in Tacoma. I went back to see it many years later. But the house, the house that we lived in West Seattle holds many stories for me.
Yeah, tell me that. You told me a story the other day.
About the
basement, the famous basement.
Other than, it was an old house with the typical cement floor basement, and my brother and I would ride our trikes and roller skate and all that typical stuff. But we also had a little room that was sectioned off where my dad made wine. And there was a stove and a table, and my mother and my grandmother would always can every year.
Vegetables and things from your own garden?
Some from our own garden, and some they would get from Yakima, peaches and pears and that sort of thing. And one interesting thing that went on, we would go to a local farm and we would buy chickens for our consumption. Live chickens though, so they came to the basement and my grandmother would slit their throats and hang them by their feet on the clothesline, and they would drip, drip, drip their blood. When they're all done, she would plunge them in hot water and pluck them. That was her job. We also went to the farm, this was in the spring, every spring. We went out and we picked out a baby goat, and this was also for consumption. So the farmer slaughtered the goat and skinned the goat, and we went home with everything. I mean, and we used everything. We used the liver, the spleen, the heart. The intestines were meticulously washed in the basement, and a filling was prepared and stuffed into them, and they were made into sausages, tied off at about 10-inch lengths. The sausages were delicious to my young mind. They had raisins in them. And it was always sad when the last one was gone, because it only happened once a year. Then maybe the most unusual thing that we had in the basement was a still. Yeah, they made, what do you call it?
Whiskey.
Hooch. It was quite a wonderful copper contraption with these copper tubes, and the alcohol, or I believe it was wine that they boiled, and the alcohol distilled, and it would drip out the end of the tube into a glass jug, And when the jug was full, it would be, my mother and my aunt would go out to the neighborhood and see if they could find anybody with a walnut tree, and they'd steal a few green walnuts and cut them up and put them into the jug with the alcohol and set the whole thing outside on the backyard in the lawn in the sun, and it would eventually turn an amber color, and that was called orahovica, after the nut. Orahi, I believe they're called.
I think so,
right.
yes. Did you ever taste it as a child?
Oh, I'm sure I did. I tasted everything. You know, when I was growing up, my father insisted that my brother and I drink wine for dinner, and I'm not talking about straight wine. It was just water with a little bit
Bavanda.
of wine, you know, whatever. But he insisted on that. He says you can drink milk for breakfast, you can drink milk for lunch, but at dinner you drink wine.
That brings me to my next question on family life. The family dinner, were you and your brother encouraged to voice an opinion, or
Never.
was it never? So it was more to be seen and not heard.
Absolutely. I think, you know, we were possessions.
That's not a very pleasant way to put it, but I agree with you.
Yeah, I think, you know, they loved us in their way, and they took care of us, but I don't feel that we were ever treated as individuals. You know, no one ever really delved into what kind of personality, you know, we
Well,
had.
I don't think they were educated in
No,
that
they
way
weren't,
at all.
and maybe it was the times,
Uh-huh,
you know,
uh-huh.
I don't think it was just a Croatian thing, I think it was just the times.
Now, did you have any feelings about the fact that your dad, as a commercial fisherman, was gone a good portion of the year away from home?
I didn't particularly, I know it was a lot of work for my mom keeping things up, and
Do you remember if he came home on weekends?
well, that was only when he was fishing locally, but he would be gone to Alaska and to California to fish for sardines, but that was when I was quite young.
Yeah, but when I first knew you after, in the college days, I know that he only fished the Puget Sound.
Right.
He didn't even go up to Alaska at that time.
No, so he was home on the weekends.
Okay, how about special occasions in which you were a participant? For example, Christmas, Easter, birthdays. Do you have any recollections at a very early age of how you felt about those?
I loved that we got together for Christmas.
And was it mostly relatives?
It was grandparents, it wasn't any other relatives.
Oh, just grandparents.
The grandparents, and you know, my aunt and uncle, they weren't married then. So, yeah, that was a lot of fun.
How about birthdays, say pre-school age? Did you have any kids over for a birthday party, or was it just a family birthday party?
It was family, and I don't even remember much of a party, to tell you the truth. I remember I had one birthday party with my friends from school, and I don't know if I was like maybe 10 or something like that, but I do remember that my mother was very, very nervous. You know, she just didn't know. She wasn't exposed to that sort of thing, and she wanted to do it right, and I kept thinking, no, Mom, you gotta do this, it's time for this, and because I'd been to birthday
So
parties.
who had more anxiety, you or her?
I don't know. But, you know, it was very sweet of her to do that. I know it was very difficult for her.
I know from preliminary interviews with a lot of Croatians, many of them had financial difficulties during the towards the end of the Depression and early World War II years. I presume that your family had no problems with family finances. You were doing quite well.
Yeah, we did not have problems. You know, I never was indulged in a lot of things. You know, I even paid for my own college education, for heaven's sake, but there was not hardship. And maybe that was the generation before, I don't know, but my grandfather, my father's father, did very well. When they moved from Riverside, they built a home in West Seattle.
And what year was that?
You know, all I can remember is the early 1930s, and it cost them less than $4,000
to build a new house.
To build this new, lovely Tudor-style house.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that was built only a few blocks away from your grandparents?
Well, no, that was my grandparents' house.
Oh, that was your grandparents'
That
house.
was my grandfather's house. That's where my father lived until he married my mother.
And then she moved in with him into that house?
No, they got their own place. They rented a place at first, and then they bought their own home.
Okay. So let's go into something that I call family values before we pick up school again. What's your recollection of what did you learn from your parents about religion, the church, priests, anything of that nature? First of all, you did not go to a Catholic grade school.
No.
Or a high school.
No.
But you went to a Catholic college.
But that was my own choosing. And I didn't go to it because it was Catholic. I went to it because it was a smaller school. And it was either that or the University of Washington.
It's funny how we choose. I chose Seattle U on the basis that I did not have to take a foreign language to get my business degree. I figured that you know, I had enough trouble with English as a grade schooler that I wasn't about to pick up Spanish or German or any of that to graduate from college. So I chose that in part, good part, from the fact that I didn't need a foreign language to graduate in finance.
So you had trouble with the English language when you started school?
No, except that I never really picked it up well. I mean, I still don't know a lot of the rules of grammar.
And you weren't taught that in grade school?
Oh, sure you were taught it, but you know, went in one ear and out the other, and a lot of that. So I remember, interestingly enough, that when I was learning quote-unquote spelling in grade school, I'd ask my mother to check the spelling of the word, and she'd always say, well, what do you mean spelling? In Croatia, you know, if you knew the sound of the letter, there was only one way to spell it. There was no such thing as spelling.
It's really more practical.
Yeah.
English is terrible.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
So what about, what were your folks' feelings towards religion and the church?
You know, they went to church Christmas, Easter, you know, that sort of thing. They were not hardcore Catholics.
Did they have any positive or negative attitudes towards priests?
No, I don't think so. I don't remember it as being an issue ever.
Well, I remember that I got a very mixed feeling. You know, a lot of times they were all in favor of the church and religion, and yet the question of donating money to the church was a big deal. They thought those priests were only after everybody's money, and so they were very cynical on that. And they also, interesting story, brought up the point that, you know, that they were sort of favorably inclined towards the Serbian Orthodox Church, which existed back in Croatia. And for many, many years, I never knew until the last 5 years how, out of the island of Vis, which was 100% Catholic, I ended up with an uncle, my mother's brother, who was a Serbian Orthodox priest. And I just learned this in the last 5 years of my life, that from a person who was stationed with the military on the island of Vis during this time, at the tail end of World War II. things were just economically so bad in Vis that literally people were almost starving. And they couldn't sell their grapes to anybody. Nobody had any money to pay for them. Finally, some intelligent person on the island tried to sell grapes to the bishop of the Serbian Orthodox Church in some city on the mainland. Not far, it's still in Croatia, near the little city of Sin, I believe, where they had their archbishop. And the archbishop said, yeah, I'll be glad to buy all of your grapes if you convert to Orthodoxy. And after probably some thought and some discussion on the island, they did. They took out all the icons from the Catholic Church, put in the Orthodox icons, and that's probably when my uncle joined the church and wanted to become a priest. Now even that has more interesting aspects. They would let him become a priest only, they let him go through the seminary to learn how to, all the ins and outs. But after he was through with that, they told him that the only way he can get a parish is if he married a Serbian woman. So he did that. And you were with me when we visited Belgrade on a trip in the 70s and met them, and their two children think that they're 100% Serbian. So they were raised as Serbians, and he had all of his parishes in Serbia, obviously. But that was something that I never could quite get around. How in the world did we get a Serbian Orthodox priest off the island of Vis? And that's how.
So is Vis, a lot of Vis Serbian now?
Oh, no, they never were.
It's just the ones that left.
That conversion probably only lasted for 4 or 5 years when economic conditions got better and they told him to go fly a kite. We were going back to Catholicism.
Okay.
But in the meantime, he was studying and practicing the priesthood in Serbia.
Is he still living?
No, but his children are.
His daughter, I remember meeting his daughter.
Yeah, and his son was in France. I think he stayed in France the whole time after he grew up. So, and then how about politics? Were your parents very political?
All I remember is how sad they were when President Roosevelt died.
Yes, I remember that too. I remember hearing it in school. I was in the 3rd grade, and somebody came in and told us that he did, and they let us go for the day, and that was very sad indeed.
Mm-hmm. If they had political discussions, it wasn't in my presence. So I don't know.
How about, did they have any special feelings about what was going on? And it would probably apply more to, probably less to your dad since he was born in the U.S., but I was going to ask, did they have any feeling about what was going on in Croatia post-World War II, like Tito? Many people had opinions on Tito, of the Croatian community here in the Northwest.
No, that was not discussed.
Okay.
No.
I think some of these that I have here we already discussed. So your preschool experiences when you were real young, did you have playmates, say under 6 years old when you were that young?
I don't recall ever having a playmate into my house.
Really?
In the summertime we played outside. And I had friends outside, we would ride our bikes and roller skate, and we even had a baseball game in the summertime, and it was great because the older kids played with the younger kids and everybody was equal, But as far as, in my home, no. And later on, this was grade school, I became an avid reader. I mean, that's what I did when I was at home.
Did you start anything in the area of reading before grade school?
I don't think so.
And
I learned to read in school.
In Tacoma, where I grew up, we didn't have kindergartens, or at least at the Catholic school, grade school, I went there. Did you have a kindergarten that you went to? Or do you remember just
You
going to
know,
first
I
grade?
just remember going to school, and whether it was, whether the first time was kindergarten or first grade, I don't remember.
Yeah, we should have had these kind of interviews 40 years ago when we might have remembered
We
some
might
of
have
this.
remembered, exactly.
One interesting experience that I had relating to also to the Croatian experience was the first memory I have of anything that I remember in my life was on December 7th, 1941, when Pearl Harbor was attacked.
Oh.
I was listening to the radio at like 7:30 in the morning, and they announced that. And of course, it didn't mean too much to me. I was 4 years old, and I asked my parents. And of course, they had no idea what that was, what Pearl Harbor was, whether it was even a U.S. possession or anything. So it sort of shows you that some of the disadvantages that we had being children of immigrants, they didn't have a lot of the background and history of the country and of other things that perhaps the other kids had that we didn't.
Yeah, whether the kids would have been aware or not is hard to say, though.
Of that
Depends
kind of
on
thing.
what,
Yeah.
on what the parents would share.
Mhm.
My earliest memory is when my brother was born.
Oh, you remember that, huh?
Well, I remember it because I'd been promised I was going to get a baby brother or sister. And that went on for so long, I thought, yeah, sure, you know. And then one day my father came and woke me up, and he says, come on downstairs. He says, you have a new baby brother. My brother was born at home.
Huh?
So that was really,
So you must have been, what, under 3?
I was 3 and a half when
3
he
and a
was
half.
born.
And that was in the house in
In West Seattle.
Belvedere.
No, not
Okay.
Belvedere. That was my grandfather's house
Okay.
in Belvedere.
So what street was the other house that you? That
Our
your
house
parents lived?
that I grew up in was 44th Avenue Southwest, about a block from the Admiral Theater.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you recollect any special feelings that you had first going into the first grade?
No?
Did you feel different, inferior from the other kids because of your fact that you were Croatian American?
Well, I was a little shy. I don't know, I did feel different. Yeah, I did feel different because I knew that, my family, my mother, they were not well versed in English, and so how would I explain that to a friend, if a friend did come over,
Well, one of my embarrassing moments in grade school was after I was ill for about a week or a week and a half. My father took me to school, and he sure enough walked into the second grade and in front of the whole class told the whole story of my illness in very broken English. And so that was very embarrassing.
I can imagine, yes.
Okay, now we move into the infamous teenage years. They're always going to be typical, whether you're Croatian descent or any other descent, there's going to be typical parent-child conflicts. Do you remember any specifically vivid ones that were difficult for you?
I decided at the time that I went to high school that I'd had enough of this being shy, and I was going to be outgoing. And so I made up my mind and I joined every activity I could in high school.
Well,
And I had a lot of fun.
That was at Queen Anne High School.
That was at Queen Anne High School. And then it's kind of the opposite. When I started college, I had to get to work. I had to go to work and pay for my education. And so no more fun, or not much, anyway.
So what was your, so you didn't actually have a money-earning job prior to working for, at college then, is that right?
Right, I worked when I started college, I worked in the summer, and then I worked part-time during the school year. I didn't know, the only other thing I did before that was babysit.
And so, obviously, anything you earned then was your money, and you used it
The
for college
babysitting
expenses.
money.
Even the babysitting money was clearly yours, and you kept it.
That was mine, yeah.
How about dating restrictions by your parents? Were they rather tough on that kind of thing? I imagine you wanted to go out a little more than they were willing to let you go out.
Yeah. That's all I'll say about that.
Did they ever try to put pressure on you meeting or being with people of Croatian descent?
No, not really. Mm-mm.
And what Croatian traditions do you keep, or did you keep, when raising your own family?
Well, I think family gatherings are very important.
And we kept those up.
Yeah, and having dinner together, yeah.
And you did a good job of a good amount of Croatian cuisine that you cooked yourself and had the kids eating. And
Yeah, it was good to have that as part of my repertoire. Although I still don't make some things as good as my mother used to. But my father being a fisherman, we ate everything that came from the sea. And, from the squid to the skate to the octopus, and she cooked it all very well. Yeah.
Yeah, I had so much salmon when I was a kid that I grew up not liking salmon.
I can understand that. I hated wine for most of my life because of that insistence by my father that I have wine for dinner. But I grew out of it.
Well, I think that's about it. Let's
Okay.
let's introduce our grandchildren. Come on
Are you
over,
ready?
Penelope.
This is 2 out of 3. I thought the third one was coming too, but I guess he's not.
Penelope is carrying on the tradition. She just joined the Seattle Junior Tamboritsans 2 weeks ago and will be performing this coming Sunday at CroatiaFest. What do you think of that, kid?
Yay.
I'm very proud of her. Not just
Me
for
too.
that, but for everything, and very happy to.
And where's your brother, Luca? There he is, the future baseball player. Are the Mariners going to make the playoffs?
I hope so.
Come on, speak up.
I hope so.
Well, we'll know in 3 days.